Hey guys, Dozer here bringing you a new video. Just wanted to do a quick little follow-up to the Lexi gameplay that we've been doing on the channel for a bit here. I've been testing a lot of different builds of Lexi, tweaking cards here and there, and I think I've got a pretty interesting list here that I wanted to share with you guys that's been tweaked from the time that we built it on stream the other day. And I want to go through some of the thought processes that are behind this deck because I do think it's really interesting. I think that there are a lot of benefits to running this type of list over other lists, and I'm eager to get people's feedback on whether they think that it can be improved, and if so, how. So right off the bat, when you're playing Lexi, a lot of the times you really are trying to leverage all of the text on the hero, right? Whenever you're playing any hero, you don't just want to focus on maybe just the card pool or maybe just one line of text. You want to try and maximize everything. So for Lexi, we're going to be trying to leverage her hold card pool as well as getting the most value out of this flipping ability, where we're able to use the flip ability to open up our arsenal and get value off of the equipment New Horizon, which allows us to have multiple cards in our arsenal at one time, which combined with Voltaire will allow us to go really wide with arrow turns and be able to sequence things in a way to get 3 arrow turns off pretty consistently, as well as have just really flexible play lines off of cards like Endless Arrow and things like this. So Lexi's really good at doing that with her hero ability. And we're also able to flip elemental cards like lightning and ice cards in order to get a little bit of extra benefit. So in order to synergize with these cards, we're going to be running things like Bullseye Bracers and Snapdragon Scalers, which are going to allow us to go even further on turns based on having 3-of-a-kind turns or other such type turns, where Snapdragon Scalers represents a way to open up our arsenal to be able to allow us to get access to either more uses of arrows on our turn off of something like Endless Arrow, or to be able to free up our arsenal so we can actually reload something with effects like Bullseye Bracers, because Bullseye Bracers is effectively a card that reloads an arrow for +1, and on turns that we need to fire a bolt and shot, this can give that card go again and represents a free Voltaire effectively, as well as helping to get us out of some awkward hands on 3-of-a-kind turns where we only have 2 uses of Voltaire. Again, this just kind of gives us an extra use when we need it. They don't block, which is a bit sad sometimes, but overall it works out just fine for us. We're also going to be running Quiver of Rustling Leaves because this quiver allows us to make the most out of our resources on turns where we're resource flooded, and we can try and dig for another arrow to go a bit wider, which can be really relevant, although oftentimes it's kind of a last resort type of play. It's still nice to have, and again, we can run a quiver, so we may as well have Rustling Leaves on most matchups. Now, I'm personally currently running Vindal Spring Tunic because it allows you to go down to low card hands and, reliably can get you that extra resource to be able to afford a 1-cost arrow here or there, especially on turns where you go for Codex of Frailty. A big part of the weakness of that card is that you actually have to discard remaining cards in your hand. And so if the only card you have left in your hand when you have a Frailty is a red card, maybe like a red arrow or something, you're not going to be able to pitch that to Voltaire to have any floating to be able to use the card out of your graveyard. So Spring Tunic allows you to have these sequences where you hold onto it and you can do a Heat Seeker out of Arsenal, you can do a 1-cost arrow off of Frailty and not have to worry too much about how you are sequencing your cards, especially on those pitch-starved hands. So that's why we're sticking with that, although you could run things like Trench of Sunken Treasure, you could run things like the Blossom of Spring, plenty of different options like that, and it'd be totally fine. Right off the bat, let's talk about the basic cards. Most Lexi lists are pretty homogenized on the best cards at this point. Things like Bolt and Shot, red and yellow, Drill Shot, red, Endless Arrow, Heat Seeker. A lot of these cards are very standard now, but Falcon Wing is still catching on. I think some people still don't really love this card, but in a list like this where we're not really relying on the fuses so much, Falcon Wing really allows us to get a lot of value out of arsenaling cards off of Ponder, or being able to say, hey, I'm trying to set up this turn, I can throw this Falcon Wing into Arsenal, lead off with it, and it makes all of your reload effects much stronger because you're not clogging up that arsenal to some random 0-cost arrow. And so having this on turns where you're going really wide with effects like Icequake or other types of things like that, like maybe it's a Rain Razor's 3-of-a-kind turn, Falcon Wing just represents a lot of free value that you don't have to spend your Snapdragon Scalers on. Snapdragon Scalers is really important to use at the correct time, and so Falcon Wing having that innate go again at just the cost of 1 raw damage and an on hit a lot of the time is totally fine. It's totally worth the inclusion, for my opinion. So we've also got Infecting Shot into the deck. So Infecting Shot is just a high value arrow, right? If this hits, it's effectively worth 7 damage for 1 resource to fire and 1 resource to load. And if this was in your arsenal, you just pay 1 resource and end your turn with it off of maybe a zero cost arrow turn, right? Pay 1 to load them, give them go again, fire infecting shot at the end. Coming in for 5, if they don't block it or can't block it, it represents 1 for 7, which is pretty good. So infecting shot's really good as a red, and we can get this off of Codex of Frailty on some turns where we need to really push damage and not card advantage. So infecting shot ends up working really well, especially as a 3 block. I've been really enjoying this card, although I think that you might be able to get away with running 2 copies and maybe throwing in 1 copy of a Death Touch in the main deck, because Death Touch is really strong at being a 6 power, deal Blood Rot on hit, so it's slightly stronger than Infecting Shot on raw value, and it can give you the flexibility of the Frailty tokens and Inertia tokens, maybe against Ninja or Guardian or something. And normally your play lines are not going to lead to you needing to fire the Infecting Shot out of hand every time. So having 1 copy of Death Touch might be good enough as an extra access to a Phantasm Breaker for decks like Dromai, where you can probably fit it in there, especially with the amount of reloads that we're running, because we're running Icequake Red at 2 copies instead of 3, because we're using the Lightning Surge here as that other type of either turn ending or turn starting play out of Arsenal, where, yeah, Icequake is really good when you can lead off with it and fire 2 zero-cost arrows and Arsenal your last card, but a lot of the time it's a little too expensive on the resource costs, so I like having 1 Lightning Surge because it combos with Codex of Frailty a lot of the time and gives you some better play lines off of something like Tunic Resource, Bullseye Bracers. You have Lightning Surge in graveyard, you have Codex Frailty in hand, and a Endless Arrow in arsenal. You can play your Codex, flip your Lightning Surge, attack with the Endless Arrow. If they don't block it, you can then use your Voltaire off Tunic to reload your Endless Arrow, fire it for 4 with go again. If they don't block it, you can then fire a Lightning Surge and then Bullseye Bracers your Endless Arrow for another 4 damage. So that turns a normal 2-card play that would normally do about 8 damage, maybe 9, depending on the card you arsenaled, or it can be 16, or sorry, 17 because of the Bullseye Bracers giving +1. So it's quite good. As a play line there a lot of the time when they really don't want to block, or as a turn ender where they can't block, right? It can push a lot of damage. So giving up 1 Icequake for the ability to run 1 Lightning Surge just for that upside, or if you draw all 3 Icequakes for some reason, you could at least pitch 1 card and play 2 Icequakes and then attack with Lightning Surge for 10, and it would give 2 Frostbites on hit, which isn't going to happen a lot, but it's relevant when it can come up. So I think that having slightly fewer of the Icequakes, especially because they cost 1, make room for the Lightning Surge, actually feels really great. Then we're running a lot of cards like Pathing Helix, and these are just more copies of Bolt and Shot, right? It's 0 for 4, or more likely 1 for 4, go again, reload. It's pretty powerful because, again, it gives you that extra reach, maybe saving you a resource on an Infecting Shot, or maybe it saves you the ability to go a bit wider on 3 of a kind turns where you can't play cards out of your hand, so being able to reload can get those non-attack actions out of your hand, like a Codex of Frailty, like a buff card, or even more arrows. At the same time, Searing Shot is just a really good 0-cost arrow where it represents just some extra raw damage. And so before I was kind of running 0-cost yellows, like Drill Shot yellow in this place, but I think that especially when your opponents are using their armor aggressively in the early game, you're really not getting a lot of value off that yellow Drill Shot in the second cycle to be worth running, and their deck really doesn't struggle from pitch problems anymore. So being able to run these red cost arrows and be able to say, hey, here's 1 for 7 because if this, or 1 for 6, right? Because if you bluff by 1 at the end of your turn off of Voltaire, it comes in for 5, deal 1 on hit. So that's, 1 for 6. That's pretty good. Or it's just, 1 for 5, go again. So it's on the same kind of level as Bolt and Shot on most turns. And so the raw value of it does, I think, add up and clinch out in the end here. As well, Take Aim is a card I've been really loving instead of Premeditate. Now, I think a lot of people are over fixating on expensive cards in their Lexi lists. I think they're trying to pump that total deck cost number as high as they can go, rather than thinking about synergy, because they think, oh, Premeditate, draw card good, me draw card, or like Art of War, right? The same kind of idea. But the more I've played the deck, the more I've kind of played with the new cards out of Uprising, like Codex, I think that reload is really valuable, especially with Take Aim, because let's say you have a Codex of Frailty in hand and you have very little other things that you can do. Take Aim allows you to reload your other cards and then play your Codex at the end of your turn and kind of free up that arsenal slot a bit better, especially on lower card hands. So a lot of the time, because you have Codex of Frailty, you're incentivized to block with your arrows and then Codex of Frailty for the maximum benefit off the Ponder. And having Take Aim allows you to do things off of a 2 codex turn, right? Where you can do take aim, reload a codex, flip the codex, play the codex out of hand, return a bolt and shot to arsenal, fire it with go again off of take aim, then codex again and do something else, right? It's pretty powerful. At the same time, take aim really lets you go even wider on your 3 of a kind turns, because on your 3 of a kind turns, a lot of the time, if you're playing like a premeditate or something, it's not representing more attacks up front. It's representing some card draw, but your opponent's most likely blocking you out on a 3 of a kind turn anyway, because realistically, you're firing 2 arrows, maybe a 3rd arrow. At the end of the chain, maybe you burn Snapdragons to try and force a slightly wider turn through, but you're giving up a lot of resources in order to do that, and you have to commit a lot. Whereas with the take aim, being able to take aim an arrow into arsenal or even a codex on a 3 of a kind turn can really let you push even further, and it just feels really great. So I think take aim in that 0 cost 3 buff spot, that can also save you resources because, again, it reloads your arrows so you don't have to pay for the extra Voltaire, or you can get past your 2 Voltaires on a turn to go even wider. Synergizing with your bolt and shots and arsenal, it really does, I think, add up. And I think take aim is a card that people are really underestimated in Lexi. I think it's a really powerful card, especially in these no fuse lists. Because again, you'll notice that we're not running any chilling ice veins, we're not running any blizzard bolts, anything like that. And we've got fatigue shot here. Well, fatigue shot is just really good glue card, I think. This slot I'm not 100% sold on, but I do think a yellow arrow here is the way to go. I think that having the breakpoint to be able to say, hey, Guardian, you're going to lose 4 damage off your attack, or however much you're saving, right? If it's a crippling crush that they're trying to throw at you, being able to disincentivize that is really powerful, as opposed to just 2 damage. Because if you get hit by those debilitating on hits, well, you don't get to have a turn after that anyway. So the 2 damage won't necessarily help you get back in the game, whereas fatigue shot can keep them at arm's range so that you can actually keep drawing up your cards, keep cycling through your multiple big card hands, and stay on that front foot. So I like fatigue shot yellow here. Though I think you could run sleep dart. I think you could run infecting shot yellow. There are other cards that could go in here, but I do think this card is the most generally useful at the time, especially because against aggro decks even, it makes their 0 for 4s blockable by 1 card. Whereas, if I'm throwing a lot of other arrows at someone, it's not going to be that impactful. So I do think fatigue shot comes in to be really useful. But let's talk about the blues now. Everyone knows that Rain Razors is really good for Lexi. We get this on our 3 of a kind turns, on our Rain Razors turns, our Endless Arrow turns. It's really powerful. Let's move on to the interesting thing, which I think is the blues, because a lot of these cards are very standard, right? The bolt and shots, drill shots, endless, like nothing here is really surprising. Maybe like the take aim, maybe, some other things are a little different, but you can understand the logic. A lot of people, though, are currently running blue arrows in their blue slots, like blue Pathing Helix, blue drill shot, blue bolt and shot, a lot of these cards. And the more I've seen that, the more I just cannot agree with it. The reason is that when you are playing Lexi, you never want to be playing your blues, right? If you've got multiple blues in your hand, you are in a really bad position, because the whole point of playing Lexi is to pitch a blue card, fire 2 arrows, arsenal something at the end of the turn, hopefully another arrow, do a 3-card arrow or a 3 arrow turn on the next play, and just kind of keep going on about your day. You never really want to be playing your blues, almost ever. And so when you're looking at blues in Lexi, let's say you're attacking your opponent, and they're blocking. Well, if they're blocking out, and then you drop a hand of all blues, and you throw 2 damage, go again, reload, 3 damage, go again, reload, these really wimpy cards at your opponent, they're just going to take it and then crack back with a full hand. Then you're going to have to deal with crippling crushes, spinal crushes, red in the ledgers, all these types of effects. And it's really hard to stand up to that. So instead of doing that, I thought like, okay, well, if I'm playing my blue cards, if I'm in this situation where I've drawn like 2 blues in the same hand, and I've had to block some stuff to prevent myself from getting blown out by this big on hit, well, what situations in that example would I want to have blue arrows? And the answer is like never, right? The blue arrows are really weak and really not threatening compared to having some ice blues that are just generically good on their own and synergize off each other. So why am I running these cards? Well, Channel Lake Frigid, anybody that's played against it knows how powerful this card is. It's a blue 3-block ice card. So if you flip it in Arsenal, give your opponent a frostbite. And when you just play this, it makes it super hard for them to play through on their turns, especially if they thought that they were safe. You lead with 2 arrows, they don't block, they say they want to come back at you with maybe a full hand of stuff, and you say, okay, now Channel Lake Frigid with an ice card and pitch. And now they're just saying, oh, okay, now my turn's terrible and I still took all this damage. So Channel Lake Frigid is really good on that aspect. And again, you can play this first before you do a 3 of a kind turn and just turn off your opponent's D-reacts efficiency, right? And then you can also just buy time. You know, if I draw a full hand of blues, because sometimes that happens, or you draw a hand that has very heavy blues, and it's not really worth it to throw one arrow and play a blue or something, you could play your Lake Frigid out, arsenal your arrow, and then have a really big turn the next turn because you know your opponent can't come back and threaten you very much. The same kind of idea with Channel the Bleak Expanse. Now, a lot of time that this card's been available since Uprising, it's not really seen much play. For those who don't know what it does, Channel Bleak Expanse costs 1 resource and has the same effect as Channel Lake Frigid, where if you pitch an ice card, you can keep this card around for an increasing number of turns, right, depending on how many ices are in your pitch. But what it says is that heroes cannot draw cards, reveal cards, or search decks from effects. Now, this effect is super relevant in the current metagame. Not only is it good against Katsu, because he wants to draw cards off Mask Momentum, Whelming Gust Wave, as well as searching his deck off his hero ability to get these really powerful combos off. There's also plenty of heroes that want to reveal cards, like even Icelander, and Oldhim likes to fuse as well, Lexi sometimes likes to fuse. And Azalea likes to draw cards every single turn off of things like Death Dealer. So being able to have Channel the Bleak Expanse, or even Ponder tokens, right? Having the ability to have Channel the Bleak Expanse out to prevent your opponent from, or, you know, sinking cards or drawing things off of Crown of Providence, or not Crown of Providence, Crown of Dominion. No, I was right. Providence is the right one. Channel the Bleak Expanse really can shut down these things. Kyloria draws a lot of these very powerful effects that normally if we just had some blue arrows, we'd be feeling really terrible. But if we had 2 Channel the Bleak Expanse in our hands, well, we can at least slow our opponent down for a turn. We draw up. The only time this is ever bad for us is if we have 3 of a kind in our hand and nothing else, because obviously we can't draw cards off of it with Channel the Bleak Expanse up, but because of Ponder tokens resolve at the end of the turn, and we can choose whether or not to keep Channel the Bleak Expanse around, most of the time we are able to play Channel the Bleak Expanse, not order them wrong, and we can get rid of the Channel the Bleak Expanse and then draw off our Ponder token. And so unless you are literally drawing like 2 3 of a kinds after you drop a Channel the Bleak Expanse, you're going to be able to play your thing off. And on top of that, you're very rarely ever playing it in the first place. You know, there are some matchups where it's good to play it out, but in most cases, it's just a pitch 3. It's just a blue pitch. It still blocks some. And again, it doesn't block 3, but you're not trying to block your blues anyway. So being able to have this around for those matchups where it's really impactful, like slowing down the Azalea draws, slowing down the fusion, slowing down the ninjas, it's really powerful. And honestly, much better than like a Polar Blast or something where, you know, if you have multiple of these ice cards in your hand at once, they're really terrible, right? We're really trying to maximize the blue heavy hands because, again, most of the time we're trying to just throw damage at our opponent. We don't really care what our blue cards are, except for the fact that they pitch and block. But when we've got the ability to run cards that synergize off of themselves, right? You can pitch Channel Lake Frigid to pay for Lake Frigid, and it works. You can do the same thing with Bleak Expanse. You know, if you've got Bleak Expanse and Lake Frigid, you can choose which one you pitch and get the effect of the other one. And you also have stuff like Frostlock, which is an amazing blue card. Even if you're not running any ices at all, it's great, because if you attack with this, no matter if it's fused or not, cards and activated abilities that your opponent hero tries to use cost an additional resource. So Frostlock, when you attack with it, already has the Heart of Ice or Channel Lake Frigid effect built into the card. And if you fuse it, which again, we can fuse it fairly reliably when we're not pitching Frostlock or blocking with it, right? We can get a +1, so it becomes a breakpoint with Go again. And if it hits the opponent, they can't play or pitch 0 cost cards. And because it comes in with that extra 1 cost, if they want to cover this with a sink below, they have to give up 2 cards to block this as a blue, which is amazing. You know, if you think about how much people are going to be blocking with 2 cards against like a blue Infecting Shot or a blue Pathing Helix, that's never happening, right? Or Bolton Shot. But this forces your opponent to, and punishes them by punishing their D-reacts, forces them to block you with multiple cards or cards with armor, so that they can even use their D-reacts. Because if you hit them with this, they can't even play their D-reacts on the rest of the chain. So it really forces a lot of answers out of your opponent. And again, as a 3-block that can do this even when it's not fused is just amazing. At the same time, Winter's Bite's just an amazing blue card as well. If they don't have a Tunic resource or very efficient ways to use pitch on their turn, you can either rip a red out of their hand to slow their turn down, or you can rip a blue out of their hand if they pitch extra because they're worried about maybe you hitting them with another one. and you just remove 3 block out of their hand. So we already know how powerful Codex of Frailty is for removing block out of people's hands, so Winter's Bite being able to do that potentially multiple times in a turn as a blue is really great, especially when, again, we draw multiple blues at the same time. Winter's Bite allows us to slow our opponent down even when we can't attack. So being able to do Winter's Bite into Channel Lake Frigid or Winter's Bite into Channel Bleak Expanse is going to really hamper our opponent and give us time to draw our own good cards and get back on the front foot. Cold Snap is a kind of a similar idea where when you play this out of Arsenal, it draws you a card, so it's very useful at maintaining advantage on your cards, especially because you can give your opponent that Frostbite. And if they have a card in Arsenal, like a Sink Below, and you hit them with the Cold Snap, they have to pay a resource and to even be able to use that Sink Below. So you're getting like a blue out of their hand, because if they pitch a red, they have to give you multiple things, right? So Cold Snap can be really, really powerful at slowing down your opponent's setup, and also like if they've got a Crippling Crush in their arsenal, being able to get a card out of their hand and give them a Frostbite can basically prevent them from casting it at all, as well as freezing allies like Dromai's Dragons. It does a lot for the deck compared to Polar Blast, which gives Dominate to 4 power arrows, which isn't great, right? So Cold Snap can be really good. I think these ices synergize really well together. I think that in the cases where you actually want to play off of your blues, I think they should all synergize with each other really well. I think that blue arrows are really, really weak, and I think that the upside of drawing into some blue arrows on a 3-of-a-kind turn is kind of in a moot point when you're able to run things like Pathing Helix, Bolt and Shot, Bullseye Bracers, or even the Quiver of Wrestling Leaves to get things out of your hand on those 3-of-a-kind turns. And maybe not playing so much in the maximum ceiling of 3-of-a-kind turns, but really just relying on them as value turns and not really relying so much on saying, hey, I'm trying to maximize my Rain Razor's 3-of-a-kind setups. You know, maybe that ends up being correct, but I haven't felt the need to run all of those extra cards, especially because we're really only losing about, you know, a couple block off the Channel of Bleak Expanses and the Cold Snaps by getting rid of blue arrows. And on top of that, we're just able to run so many good red arrows. So yeah, that's the main thrust of the argument here. Let me know what you think about blue arrows versus ice blues in the comments. I think that the other really nice thing about Channel of Bleak Expanse is that since we are not relying on ice fusing, we can play this card and again have almost a 0 downside. Whereas we shut down Ice Lexis, we shut down Icelanders, we shut down Ninjas, we shut down other Rangers in general because they can't get the value off the Ponder tokens, they can't get the value off of, you know, doing all these different effects. And it even works well against Assassin, because Assassin really wants to attack you with things like Shakedown, which force you to reveal your hand, and you can't do that with Channel Bleak Expanse. So your hand is safe from your opponent. Kano can't search his deck off of things like his Lessons in Lava, you know, things like this. So I think this card is really undervalued. I think it's really slept on in this no fuse type of Lexi list. Or again, if you have your 1 fusion target in the deck, 1, you don't even have to fuse it to get the benefit, and 2, you could just, you know, pitch the Channel of Bleak Expanse and go about your day, right? You don't have to play it. It's just an option that synergizes with your other blues and really is positioned well in the meta right now, I think. Going beyond that, the sideboard's still pretty up for debate. I think that there's a lot of considerations for which matchups you really struggle into, namely Dromai and Oldhim. I think that Arctic Incarceration in general is very powerful against aggro decks, especially something like Azalea, where it just gives you that extra consistency to stop them from what they're doing and stay on the front foot. I think Death Touch is a really powerful 6 attack card, which is very relevant into Dromai. And, you know, you don't want to have too many copies of these because you can't play them out, but 2, I think, is a fine number, and being able to run, you know, Death Touch, Down and Dirty, and Battering Bolts, or other 6 power attacks like Man and Conquer, whatever you want to do. Humble still works. Cut Down to Sides also works. You're able to pop enough dragons to stay in the game against Dromai, and potentially, you know, end the game before they can kill you or fatigue you. And so I think having a lot of these 6s is really important into Dromai. At the same time, against Oldhim, I'm still figuring out what to do with that matchup. I think that right now my list is ignoring Oldhim. I think that maybe against an Oldhim who's not fully prepared for you, you could probably win with this list, but I think the combination of Rampart, Crown of Seeds, and all the defensive cards that he runs, as well as the collateral damage that Lexi's facing from getting hit by things like Endless Winter, Choke Slam, and pummels and things like this, I think that Oldhim is really, in a Spinal Crush, of course, I think that Oldhim is just a really bad matchup in general, and I think that you know, you can try to run things like Remembrance, you can try to run things like the Quiver of Abyssal Depths for, you know, more copies of Remembrance on the board. But I think that you just kind of have to accept that Oldham's not a great matchup and be happy that you're so good into the rest of the field that, you know, you can probably win plenty of games off of this list alone with no sideboarding, and really just try and say, hey, Dromai's a lot more popular than Oldham. I'm going to try and tech for Dromai and just hope I dodge plenty of Oldham. So that's the current deck list. That's a little bit of a deck tech for you. So far, I've seen very good results with this deck. I think it is performing very well. There's really nothing I have run into where I'm like, oh, I wish I had a different card here. I haven't really run the Battering Bolts in the Dromai very much, but you know, any 6-power card will do the same job there, so not really super concerned about it. And it does, you know, line up with your 3 of a kind turn, so it does kind of work out there. Yeah, so there we have it. Thanks for watching. I love talking about these theory crafting type of things with you guys. So if you have any comments or any suggestions, or you have any disagreements, I'd love to hear it in the comments and we can hash it out and maybe address in the next video. So if you haven't checked out SloopDoop's channel on YouTube, definitely make sure you take a look soon. He and I did a podcast episode today for his Chadcast YouTube channel. So I'll be sure to link that channel in the description below, so you can go ahead and check out us, you know, just talking and having a good chat there in maybe a day or two. So thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video. Have a good day and take care. Peace.